In 1945, a psychiatrist walked out of a concentration camp. He had lost his wife, his mother, his father, his brother, his unborn child, the manuscript he had spent his life writing, everything. And yet within a year, he sat down and wrote a book, in 9 days, that would go on to sell over 16 million copies and change the way the entire world thinks about suffering, purpose, and what it means to be human. His name was Viktor Frankl, and in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the 4 most powerful ideas from his masterpiece, Man's Search for Meaning. The first idea might be the most important thing you hear this year. Idea 1, the will to meaning. Inside Auschwitz, Frankl watched men die every day, but he noticed something that no textbook on psychology had ever explained. The men who died first were not always the weakest. They were not always the sickest or the oldest. The men who died first were the ones who had lost their reason to keep going. There was a composer in the camp, a man who had once written music that people paid to hear. He told Frankl about a dream. A voice had come to him and said the war would end on March 30th. He believed it completely. He staked everything on that date. But as March 30th approached, the war news made it clear. Liberation was not coming. On March 29th, the composer collapsed with a fever. On March 30th, he became delirious. On March 31st, he was dead. The doctors called it typhus. Frankl called it something else. The man's hope was attached to a single date, and when that date failed him, his body followed. Frankl saw the same pattern repeated across the camp. The death rate spiked in the week after Christmas 1944, not because conditions got worse, but because thousands of prisoners had believed they would be home by Christmas. When they were not, something inside them broke, and their bodies could not hold on without it. From this, Frankl drew a conclusion that would become the foundation of everything he taught. The primary drive of a human being is not pleasure. It is not power. It is meaning. He called it the will to meaning, and he proved, not in a laboratory, but in the worst conditions ever created, that a man with a reason to live can endure almost anything, and a man without one will not survive even mild disappointment. But where does that meaning come from, especially when everything external has been stripped away? Idea 2, the lost human freedom. One night in the camp, everything was falling apart. New rules had been announced. Prisoners could now be executed for the smallest infractions. A man had been caught stealing potatoes, and the entire camp had been forced to go without food for a day as punishment. The prisoners lay in their huts in the dark, cold, starving, silent. The senior block warden stood up and began to speak. Then he pointed to Frankl and said, "You, talk to them." Frankl was exhausted. He had no energy, no notes, no desire to give a speech. But he stood up in the dark and spoke to men who had nothing left. He did not lie to them. He told them their chances were terrible. He estimated his own survival odds at 1 in 20. But he told them that no one could know what the next hour would bring. He told them that everything they had already experienced, every joy, every love, every act of courage, was permanently real. It could never be taken back. Having been, he said, is also a kind of being, perhaps the surest kind. And then he told them the thing that mattered most, that human life never stops having meaning, not under any conditions, that someone, a friend, a wife, a God, was watching each of them in this moment, and that someone would hope to find them suffering with dignity, not miserably, proudly. When the lights came back on, the men were crying, and one by one they limped toward him to shake his hand. That night proved something that Frankl would spend the rest of his life teaching. Everything can be taken from a person: possessions, health, freedom, the people they love, everything except one thing: the freedom to choose how you respond to what is happening to you. That is the last human freedom, and it is the one that matters most. Idea 3, love beyond death. It was before dawn, bitterly cold. Frankl marched in a long column of prisoners toward the worksite, stumbling over ice, his swollen feet barely fitting inside his shoes. His mind was consumed with the tiny, miserable calculations of survival, food, shoelaces, which foreman would be waiting for them. Then the man beside him whispered something. "If our wives could see us now." And in that instant, Frankl's mind went somewhere else entirely. He began to picture his wife's face, not as a memory, as a presence. He saw her smile. He heard her voice. He carried on a conversation with her inside his mind, and it was more real to him than the frozen ground under his feet. He later wrote that her image was more luminous than the sun rising behind the clouds. What Frankl did not know, what he would not learn until after the war, was that his wife was already dead. She had been killed in another camp, but he wrote something remarkable about this. He said that even if he had known, even if someone had told him in that moment, it would not have changed what he felt, because love, he realized, does not depend on the physical presence of the other person. It does not even depend on whether that person is still alive. Love reaches beyond the body. It finds its deepest meaning in something that cannot be destroyed. That is not sentimentality. That is a conclusion reached by a man who was standing in the darkest place on earth, holding on to the only light that could not be extinguished. So if meaning sustained the prisoners who survived, and love gave them something to hold on to in the worst moments, what happens when a person has comfort, safety, and freedom, but still feels empty inside? Idea 4. The existential vacuum. After the war, Frankl returned to Vienna and built a new career as a psychiatrist, and he began to notice something troubling. Patients were showing up in his office, not prisoners, not survivors of trauma, but ordinary people living comfortable lives, who were suffering from a condition that no existing school of psychology could adequately explain. They were not anxious in the clinical sense. They were not depressed because of a specific loss. They were empty. They described a hollowness at the center of their lives that nothing seemed to fill. Not success, not pleasure, not money. Frankl called it the existential vacuum, and he believed it was becoming the defining crisis of the modern world. One case made it painfully clear. A high-ranking American diplomat had spent 5 years in psychoanalysis, 5 years of exploring his childhood, dissecting his relationship with his father. His therapist told him his career dissatisfaction was really about unresolved anger, that the government was a father image. Frankl saw him for a few sessions and realized the truth was far simpler. The man did not need 5 more years on a couch. He needed a career that actually meant something to him. He changed jobs. The depression vanished. The lesson is uncomfortable but essential. You cannot fill a life with comfort and call it meaningful. You cannot substitute pleasure for purpose and expect the emptiness to go away. The vacuum demands something real, a task that needs you, a person who depends on you, a contribution that only you can make. People have enough to live by, Frankl observed, but nothing to live for. They have the means but no meaning. And when that vacuum goes unfilled, it does not stay empty. It fills itself with addiction, with aggression, with a restless despair that no amount of scrolling or shopping or numbing can quiet. The only antidote is meaning, and meaning, Frankl taught, is not found by asking, "What do I want from life?" It is found by asking, "What does life want from me?" I condensed this to the biggest ideas, but there is so much I could not fit into these few minutes. The story of a dying woman who found peace through a conversation with a chestnut tree. The moment Frankl chose to stay with his patients rather than escape. A technique called paradoxical intention that breaks anxiety by flipping it on its head. The full deep dive is on the channel, and it is one of the most powerful hours I have ever produced. If you found something in this that shifted how you see your own life, even slightly, subscribe. I go deep into one book at a time, and every single one is chosen because it has the power to change how you think about being alive. But before you go, One question. Not for me, for you. What is life asking of you today? Whatever the answer is, that is your meaning.